My name is Berend. I'm your host, and you are listening to a very special episode of Assets Unscripted. Today's episode is really quite special because for the first time ever, we have two hosts. I'm joined today by Rui Melo Ferrera, who is the Corporate Maintenance Manager at MAKEEN Energy, and by Sarah Nicastro, who joins me as my co-host. As we get into the discussion, you will see why we made this decision to co-host. Because Rui's story touches upon both the future of assets and the future of field service domain. Thank you both so much for joining. Rui, I'm going to start with you. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your role as a corporate maintenance manager, and give us an idea of MAKEEN Energy's business?
Hi, so thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with both of you. I work at MAKEEN Energy Gas Solutions based in Portugal. I'm corporate maintenance manager. What really attracted me to this sector is how much of our daily lives depends on energy infrastructure that most people never see. In my role, my main focus is asset performance, the digitalization of field service, improving maintenance process. I also work with a lot of service managers around the world to help them maintain and improve the performance of customers' assets and also their teams. That means using data, digital tools, and better workflows to improve asset reliability, team performance, and also the overall operational efficiency. MAKEEN Energy as a company have more than 75 years, is a global engineering and technology company, providing equipments and solutions for LPG, LNG, and other energies in more than 100 countries. So a big part of what we do is helping energy operators keep critical systems running safely and efficiently.
That's great. And when we first met, you mentioned that you spent the last couple of years overseeing a large digitization project, right? To move from a landscape of more fragmented, independent apps and tools towards one platform and one governance model even for your maintenance and asset management needs. Now, when you undertake such an enormous task, what are some of the most important governance choices that you had to make along the way?
Well, this process really started in Portugal because the service and maintenance side of MAKEEN Energy has been established here for more than 20 years. Over time, the company evolved a department that was originally called After Sales and Spare Parts into what we now call customer support. So that transformation is led by João Cardoso, and it was a very positive change. In fact, today is the CEO of Gas Solutions Division. Personally, I often say I was in the right place at the right time. So I started MAKEEN working in a relatively small facility management contract in Lisbon. Later, for personal reasons, I need to move to the north of Portugal, and the company offered me a maintenance position, one of the largest contracts that we have related to LPG infrastructures. So during my first week there, João told me to focus on digitalization. So shortly after that, he moved to Denmark to lead the new customer support organization. And about 2 years later, I officially start leading the digitalization journey for maintenance and service in the company. So in our sector, Portugal actually has a very mature service environment. The market is relatively small, and there are only a few major players. So companies need to constantly reinvent themselves to remain competitive. Today, teams in other countries like Brazil, also India, are very strong also. But Portuguese team is often seen internally as a benchmark. So the company actually started exploring digitalization back in 2016, before I joined the company, actually. So at that time, a different software solution was selected, but implementation wasn't so successful. When I revisited the project a few years later and ran some tests with the same system, I quickly became clear that it didn't really meet our operational needs. So we reassess the situation and ask a simple question. Since we already had a powerful ERP system, why do not use it? That led us to a IFS application. After validating the service and maintenance capabilities, we approved the implementation of the service and maintenance model, which became the foundation to our digitalization strategy.
And you mentioned that you started out in Portugal, you moved to the north of Portugal. And you also said that other teams are looking at the Portuguese team as an example, right? So what did you learn by starting out in Portugal that has helped you scale to some of these other countries and other regions and enable some of the other teams to also work at peak efficiency?
Well, here in terms of what we have in Portugal, this way of doing the correct thing differently, so very different than the other regions. We only sell machines. We are main focus on spare parts. So the big difference is in Portugal, we are looking on basically for service all the time. That's the main difference.
Right, that's great. And you also said that you're working on a more standardized way of looking at what does a customer have, what does their install base look like, and you also mentioned creating a picture of the moment. So I wanted to ask you about this. What does that look like? You place assets into a matrix, you look at the criteria, but what are some of the most important criteria that go into assessing a customer's install base that help you and the customer move forward?
This type of works gives the customer a clear picture of the current condition of the asset. In other words, he helps understand what actions he needs to recover the asset or bring it back in operational conditions. However, if we only analyze the present moment, we miss two very important perspectives. So we cannot properly predict the future performance of assets, and we also cannot verify whether it is still operating under the same conditions as when we was originally installed. So the real value comes from combining these three views, understanding the current state, being able to predict the future performance, and comparing it with the original design and operating conditions. This approach helps us determine what actions are needed, not only today, but also tomorrow and in the long term. To do this, we evaluate several aspects of the asset, such as functionality and criticality. For example, we analyze the degree of obsolescence, the level of utilization of the installed capacity, and the suitability for operation, the theoretical residual useful life, as well as the relevance and redundancy of this equipment. Alongside this analysis, we also perform the physical inspection of the asset, which allow us to build a complete picture of its current condition and support better decisions for maintenance, investments, and long-term asset management.
Yeah, and one of the things that also goes into this equation, obviously, is the correct use, right? When you look at OEM specifications, you look at the required maintenance, how does that factor into this level of analysis that you're performing on behalf of the customer?
So we own the equipments, we design the equipment. So that's why we know that we actually participate in the beginning of the implementation of that particular equipment. So we know everything because we have all the data on our side. So that's why it's much more easy for us to look into this and say to the customer if is in good condition or not good condition, the equipment.
So what is the biggest advantage that you and the customer get? What is the biggest benefit that you stand to gain after doing such an analysis?
So we can provide to the customer the picture of the moment, but also what he needs to maintain his assets for the next coming years. And also the investment need to maintain that asset. So with transparency, the customer can see if he can count on that asset for the next 5, 10, or 15 years. So this is the main reason they want us to analyze the assets.
And that gives a certain level of confidence, obviously, especially since no one customer is the same, right? Different customers have different requirements. Now, with all these new technologies, I want to ask you about what maturity in maintenance and asset management actually means and what it looks like. From what I understand, you have a rather clear maintenance or maturity ladder, right? From very light touch agreements that you have with customers towards more residency-based models, and ultimately things like asset performance management. Where in that ladder would you say that sophistication and these digital capabilities start to become critical and you can no longer do without?
That's actually where digitalization becomes critical for us. Once we implemented the service and maintenance model, we start to structure the way we collect and use operational data. So for us internally, data is fundamental to running the business effectively. Today, I honestly can't imagine managing operation without reliability data. Everything revolves around it. And it becomes even more important when we talk about the types of contracts where we are responsible for managing our customer assets. In those cases, we are not just performing maintenance tasks, we are actually responsible for the response to the performance of reliability and life cycle of those assets. Without a complete digital tool that allow us to monitor asset condition, track maintenance history, and analyze performance trends, it will be almost impossible to manage those assets properly. So the data allow us to move from simply reacting to problems to making informed decisions and improving long-term asset performance. Yeah, that's the main reason.
That's a great note for us to end on. I mean, in a world that is increasingly being driven by data, obviously, let me maybe ask you one final question, if I may. What is the thing that you're most excited about now that we're capturing all this valuable data, we're learning how to work with it, and we're increasingly becoming more confident in the decisions we make? What is the one technology or solution that you most look forward to in the future that is going to help you and your customers move along?
Basically, IoT systems, SCADA systems, gateway systems, all the data in the cloud allow us to predict and have the correct action for the problems that we found on the assets. So for sure, to put the machines talking to us, saying what is happening every day, every time, and behind that we have a strong system analyzing that data and also inform us that that machine is having these indicators that give to us idea that the system will fail in 1 year or in 2 months or next week. It is the thing that is more excited to predict the future, basically.
Okay. Well, hello, Rui.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. So this is where we're going to shift into talking a bit about how these capabilities set the stage for MAKEEN's even more increased focus on service, right? So you mentioned that the company started more as an engineering company, and has made a deliberate shift toward becoming a service company that also provides machines, right? So, you've talked a bit about this already, but if we kind of think about the broader concept of servitization, which is essentially what we're speaking about here, where or how in sort of the digital transformation that you've just described, what pieces of that sort of set the stage for a shift for companies like MAKEEN to
like
servitization?
Connecting machines and capturing real-time data. Technology enables advanced analytics, automation, and entirely new service opportunities and business models. With integrated digital platforms and code-based solutions, we can deliver continuous and personalized and scalable also service, which strengthen client loyalty and set us apart of the market. MAKEEN leverage IoT, big data, AI, automation, and digital platforms to improve operational insights, optimize asset performance. All of these prepare us to not just respond to a customer needs today, but also to create innovative long-term service solutions. That's why this is very important to us.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to kind of step back and take a look at the trajectory of these things, right? Because I remember, oh my goodness, in 2009, writing articles about IoT. And, so some of these core capabilities have existed in silos for quite a long time. They've been, incorporated, but it's sort of this culmination of these things combined with the advancements in really analyzing the data, right? To give that high degree of confidence you spoke about. And I think to me, from the perspective of how that allows companies like MAKEEN to servitize the business, it's because, true servitization requires the provider to take on risk. And a lot of organizations don't want to do that, rightfully so, if you don't have the infrastructure digitally, and that gives you that confidence to know that you can predict what you need to predict, you can hit the outcomes you need to hit to make that model successful. So I think it's really interesting for the future of field service audience to consider how these capabilities have kind of gotten to this point collectively that makes those models far more attainable and less risky than they have been in the past. So you and Berend were talking about the various levels of service that MAKEEN provides. So, annual maintenance, on-demand maintenance, annual maintenance, planned maintenance, and then some of these resident arrangements. I'm curious how you see those offers evolving over the next couple of years, given, that from a technology standpoint, things are becoming continually more sophisticated.
So over the next coming years, we see the evolution moving to asset performance management and performance-based contracts. So where success is measured by the actual results of the assets. So this approach relies heavily on monitoring data and analytics to make informed decisions and optimize the performance. Building trust with customers will be essential, and that comes through transparency. That's the word. A proven track record, robust processes, reliability tools, and clear communication. So, in other words, it's not just about technology, it's also about combining data-driven insights with consistent, dependable service to deliver real value. So, take good decisions based on data. And also transparency to the customer. So what we have right now is, for example, we provide full access to the customer to our internal system. So basically, when the team is on the field reporting activities, and we are seeing those activities, but also the customer is seeing those activities. So at the same time, so it's impossible for us to lie on the customer. So because we are completely transparent.
Yeah, it's interesting, that the data that gives MAKEEN the confidence to progress toward these servitized models is what also allows you to build trust with customers, right? That same data is what you can show to them to say, here's what we know, here's how we would solve for this, here's how we can kind of predict what we need to do to provide you the service you're looking for. I think that degree of transparency itself can be uncomfortable to get used to, right? Like there's sort of this, opening the curtain to all of the behind the scenes that might be a bit uncomfortable. But one of the things that, I've found in my conversations is that as digitalization evolves how service is offered and delivered, you have more possibilities for remote fault detection and avoidance or even remote resolution, et cetera. I think ultimately customers want the outcome. They want the result. They want the peace of mind. But what I often caution people against is they don't only want that, right? So if you are just providing that outcome without any of the context, it's easy for them to minimize the value of what it took to achieve that outcome. And that's where this idea of that level of visibility and that transparency is important because it allows the customer to see what is going on that enables you as the provider of those outcomes to keep, their environments up and running. So how have you sort of built that transparency, that visibility and that transparency into these relationships to make sure that, you know, customers see the full value of what it takes to achieve the outcomes that you're moving more toward?
To be very sharp on this on this question, we always measure the impact of our work on the customer. For example, after a visit, if it's not a non-residential contract, we present the results immediately, showing exactly how they operate before and how the impact of the visit improve their operation. So in many cases, after just one on-demand visit, customers decide to sign an annual preventive maintenance contract with us because they can see the results in their own eyes. So in real time, you can say, you just arrive there, we say, you product 1,000 bottles of LPG, and now after our visit, you are increased 20% or 25% your production. So our customers need to focus on that core business.
Mm-hmm.
For most of them, they're selling LPG. Maintenance and asset performance aren't there especially, and that's where we come in. By partnering with us, they can focus on what they do best, while we ensure world-class availability and reliability on their assets. It's really about giving them peace of mind and tangible operational improvements. So that's what we do every day.
Yeah. And I think it's powerful to consider how that one-time example, that one-time illustration can have such an impact. It's just a mindset shift, I think, for some organizations that aren't used to having that level of transparency of, in that relationship that these newer offerings, these newer delivery models, they just require to do things a bit differently. I think it's also interesting, you mentioned earlier that I believe you said in Portugal, there's this need for customers to be constantly kind of reinventing themselves, right? And so there's a lot of pressure on those customers then even more so, right, to focus on their core value proposition because it isn't even something that's staying very consistent. They're continually having to put effort into, how they're reinventing themselves, which means these types of partnerships are important because it takes concern off of them in doing these things that are not that core competency. It allows them to focus on, how they're going to market and what they're defining their brand as, and, all of the things that are more competitively important, even though the functionality is absolutely critical, right? So, Yeah, and I think there's many, many examples in different industries and different customer contexts where that is the case. Companies want more support in these, core critical functions because they just have too much to do otherwise. And I think companies like MAKEEN that can take the evolution of digital capabilities and turn that into these new ways to support customers and meet their needs is really smart. So on this journey of digital transformation that you've been leading over the last couple of years, I'm curious what has changed most for the frontline workforce, and then how you anticipate that will change further in the coming years.
So for our teams, the way they work was really changed. Now they can plan for the next day in advance or next week, of course, and all the information. That is the big change for us. All the information they need, the tasks, the tools, the team responsible is in their phones. So everything is literally at their fingertips. After a long shift, they no longer need to spend time compiling notes into reports, sitting in the chair. Most of the guys don't like that. We know that. They are creating reports through the day almost automatically without even realizing it, because today having a phone in the hand is just normal. If they need information, there's no more searching through piles of paper or asking someone else. It's already in their hands. They also move less. That's fun, because they can see jobs by location and get real-time updates if higher priority task comes in, for example. Looking ahead, this will get even smarter. So right now with the AI assistant that IFS Cloud have, for example, the system will properly help plan tasks, suggest priorities, and guide teams through their work, making operations even easier and more efficiency. So we take the boring part of the work of our technicians, because most of the time they want to be in action. They don't want to make reports. We know that. So digitalization is also important to get our teams motivated, because they don't really like do that kind of job. So reporting what they did. So it's all about working smarter, not harder, and preparing our teams for a more connected and intelligent future. That's what we want.
Yeah. Again, really smart, right? And if you think about the shift from companies who are providing more break fix type service to these, outcomes driven relationships, it's interesting to consider how the digital enablement of the frontline factors in, right? So I think often we can have this focus on efficiency for the sake of what can we reduce, what can we save on. But really in this situation, what it allows is scalability and capacity, right? So they're doing less things that are not only boring or cumbersome or frustrating to them, like spending hours doing reports, but that's also from, a value proposition standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, from a company standpoint, it's not the best use of anyone's time, right? So you can eliminate those tasks, not because you want to have less technicians, but because it allows them to do more of these, value-driven things to serve more customers in these new models, which I think is it's definitely working smarter, but it's also shifting the perspective of how we look at efficiency. It's efficiency for the sake of being able to scale better and get to more, not through the lens of reducing or cutting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that is very difficult for us is to find people you want. They want people who wants to work in this type of environments, because we are talking about environments with GPL, so LNG, or so it's not. It's not a good environment. It's not like working in a cafe with a very good smell in the air, So we need also to have tools to be more efficient. It's important to serve better the customers, but also to attract more people to this kind of jobs, because it's really difficult to find people they want to work on this. So if we are on paper, and the new generation don't like paper for sure, so um, it's really important that we have also this kind of capabilities. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's definitely challenges in attracting new people in. So, how do you make the roles more attractive? And it takes us right back to, another layer of motivation to remove those manual, inefficient aspects of the role. Rui, I appreciate you coming and sharing with both of us. I guess as a final question, if you look back at what you've learned over the last few years of sort of helping progress MAKEEN in its digitalization journey, what lesson learned or words of wisdom would you share with everyone?
It's a path. People who want to change and who needs to be really focused on this. Don't put their arms down. Okay, so it's very difficult to change because we have people working 20 years, 15 years at the same way. So it's very difficult to change. But also, we also need to explain to the people that we need to be more progressive, and we also need to listen to the people and say, okay, now you have a different way of doing things. Tell me, how can I help you also to improve your experience using this new tool or working in a different way? So it's not only about, it's important. Yes, it's important. The company needs, of course, the company needs. But also, after all of that, how can I help this technician, listen to him, and say what I can do differently for you to be more to be more easy for you to using this. So that part is kind of what I recommend, because the rest of most of the people knows what they need to do, and all the people talk about management, change management is important, and all of that. But listen to the people, because sometimes they don't want to change. I know most of the time is difficult that break that barrier, but also after they understand they need to change, listen to them, help them improve their work. Also, I try to do that all the time when I visit the sites. I always ask the technician what you need, what you think that is important to change. Even most of the time, it's not possible to change. We know that, but at least we listen to guys and we try to put on the backlog to see if it's possible in the new version, or if it's possible to do something that help them to embrace the change even better.
Yeah, people want to feel part of it, right? And I think there's a couple important points there. I was actually just recording a podcast yesterday, and we were talking a bit about change management, and it came up about something you've heard a million times, which is communicate the why, right? But my point was the company's why and your why and their why are all going to be different, right? And so, like you said, yes, the company needs to do this, right? Everyone understands that. And to some extent, you know, you get into situations where, you know, there are things that are a necessity and everyone's just going to need to comply, right? However, you know, as the person who's communicating that message to these individuals, you have the opportunity to personalize it to what version of that why is going to matter most to them. And that is different than the company version or even your version. And so I think understanding that importance is one point, but I really, really like your point about listening. And there's this human need to feel heard, even when, like you said, a lot of it you can't actually do much about, at least immediately, right? But if you just by taking the time to listen, you know, you kind of ease that tension or frustration a bit. And then, you know, you put things on a list, you know, you let people know, even if you listen and you say right then and there, I hear you, I understand, we're not going to be able to do anything about that, but, you know, we could do something about this or we can look into that, right? It's just really important. And I think it doesn't get done as much as it needs to because it's time consuming and companies want to just race to let's get done, let's move on to the next thing. But you end up having to go back and undo some of the results of rushing through that. So really, really good advice, Rui. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. We both appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing a bit of your journey. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
You can learn more by visiting the home of Assets Unscripted at futureofassets.com. Also, be sure to pop over to futureoffieldservice.com as well. Both podcasts are published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.